Hi, I'm Jeremy, the Zoo Nerd, coming to you live from my backyard in Los Angeles, California. How are you doing today? I hope you're well, I hope you're happy, healthy, and having some fun. Today we're going to talk about an iconic species of the plains of Africa. Today in our critter chat we're going to talk about wildebeest, also sometimes called gnu's or sometimes called gnu, depending on how you pronounce it. I'm going to refer to them as wildebeest. Wildebeest was a name given to them when the Dutch settled in South Africa, and they thought they looked like wild beast, and therefore it got named wildebeest. Wildebeest are a very charismatic animal on the plains of Africa. They are very well known by most people. When you think of Africa, the image of wildebeest crossing a river is one of the images that often comes to your mind. Wildebeest are good size. They weigh between 300 and about 600 pounds, depending on the species and subspecies and where they live. They're also about 4 foot high, 4.5 feet tall at the shoulder. So that means their shoulder's about here. And then they have a very large, odd-looking head that's attached to that. They also have a very long horse-like tail with single hairs that's about 20 inches or so in length. They use that as a fly swatter, incidentally, and it works fairly well for them. Both males and females of wildebeest have horns. Their horns are very sharp and they typically curve upward. On the more common species, they kind of curve to the back. On the black wildebeest, which is the species found in southern Africa, they kind of curve forward. The horns can be very sharp. They're not super long, but they can definitely protect themselves with their horns. Horns on all antelope are bone. They're attached to the skull. They're often covered in like an enamel-like coating called keratin. Keratin's the same thing that our fingernails and our hair is made out of. And they are permanent. So they start growing when they're little. They continue to grow throughout their life, getting a little bit bigger as the animal ages. And they don't lose their horn unless they break it. If they break it, it won't grow back. So then they're just left with a stubby nub of whatever used to be a horn. Wildebeest are very odd-looking animals. To look at them, you would think that this is the antelope that skips leg day at the gym. Their legs are quite long but very, very skinny, and the rest of their body is pretty bulky, especially at the front half. They have a really deep chest, they have a really big head, they have a lot of hair hanging down, so they look kind of top-heavy and front-heavy. With definitely looking like they skip leg day at the gym on those skinny legs. They live throughout areas of eastern and southern Africa. There are 2 species of wildebeest. They are kind of called different species based on the main color that they are. The more common is called the blue wildebeest. It's actually more of a bluish gray color. And then the less common one is the black wildebeest that has a lot of black coloration on its head, and it's kind of a tan body color. The blue wildebeest lives in both eastern Africa, so areas like Kenya and Tanzania, and then throughout all of the countries of southern Africa as well. The black wildebeest just lives in southern Africa. And the blue wildebeest are much, much more common than the black wildebeest. Wildebeest, are, like I said, are kind of one of those images that comes to your mind when you think about Africa. Specifically, it's the blue wildebeest that live up in Kenya and Tanzania that most of those images come from, because every year they undertake a huge migration. Migrating somewhere between 500 and 1,000 miles in a year's time, which is a lot of walking. They're kind of always on the go, never being in one place more than a couple of days. They kind of begin their migration in the southeast corner of their range down in Tanzania. And then they kind of migrate west over to near Lake Victoria, and then they kind of turn and go north, going up through the rest of Tanzania, up across the Tanzania-Kenya border, and into Kenya, into what is called the Masai Mara, before kind of turning and heading east again, and then going back down south. With all this migration, they're following the rains. Wildebeests are grass eaters, they're grazers, and they really like green grass. They don't like it when it's old, they don't like it when it's too long, they like it short and they like it green. So they will follow rainstorms so that they can always be eating the freshest, shortest grass with new growth on it. With the migration that happens between Kenya and Tanzania, they are not alone in their migration. It's mostly wildebeest, but there's also a good number of plains zebra and also a good number of Thompson's gazelle that migrate with them. They kind of all go together in a mixed herd, and it's a huge migration with a huge population. In one census that they did of that population of wildebeest, it was over 1 million wildebeest, with another about 500,000 plain zebras. Sorry, the squirrels are in my trees making a lot of noise. About 500,000 zebras and about 300,000 Thompson's gazelles. Hey, buddy, it's okay. Now my dog's barking at the squirrels, so we'll see how they do with each other. So that whole migration is a lot of animals. They are also often followed by some predators, especially on different stretches. Predators have different home ranges, so they will sometimes leave their range to follow the prey if they are desperate enough. With wildebeest, a lot of different animals will try to eat them. Definitely things like lions and hyenas. They're one of those preferred prey items for both those species. But also African wild dogs, occasionally cheetahs, especially for babies, and occasionally some other things. Even large birds of prey will sometimes go after the newborn babies, and other things like jackals and stuff. In their migration, as they cross rivers, they also have to be wary of crocodiles. You've probably seen images of crocodiles grabbing wildebeest as they cross a river. If not, I will probably be posting some of that on the Facebook page later today, because it's kind of an iconic scene from Africa. With their migration, they kind of start in January or February. That's right after the short rains have ended. So they will sniff out where the rains most recently were and kind of begin that migration west. And as they're doing that, it is time for the moms to give birth. And so they have to give birth on the go. Typically, the huge herd of wildebeest there in Kenya and Tanzania all give birth within about a 2-week time frame. And during that time frame, there's between 300,000 and 500,000 babies born while they're migrating. Sometimes they'll wait till just after the babies are born, but those babies have to be able to walk within minutes. And within a couple of days, they can outrun a lion. So they are pretty quick to learn and to grow and to be on the go. Wildebeest are pregnant, or their gestation period is about 8.5 months. So they typically give birth end of January, first part of February. That means their breeding season is in the summertime, typically in like July, June and July area. What else was I going to say about that? Oh, during their migration, they'll migrate between 500 and 1,000 miles. They'll sometimes take shortcuts and cross different ways. And it's interesting, as the herd moves, this big, massive herd of animals, the zebras sometimes make the call, and the wildebeest sometimes make the call. The gazelles kind of just follow either of them because they're smaller. But the zebras, they have a little better memory. of what's where and which ways are safer to cross. And the wildebeest, they have a better sense of smell. The wildebeest will be driven to follow their nose. They'll follow the scent of rain. It's been known that they can smell rain for up to 30 miles away. And as soon as it starts raining somewhere, they usually head that direction. They're kind of always on the go. So they're always looking for that new greener grass. The zebras, if there hasn't been rain, kind of take over and say like, oh no, the river's easier to cross over here. And they'll kind of go that way. The wildebeest will sometimes follow the zebra. Sometimes they split up, sometimes they don't. They really kind of meet up in that huge millions of animals group in a couple of key points along their migration. So those are the common wildebeest, also known as the blue wildebeest. In that Kenya and Tanzania population, that's about 80% of the common wildebeest numbers, numbering right around 1.5 million animals in Africa. About 1.3 million of them are in Kenya and Tanzania, with the others kind of scattered in about 7 or 8 different countries further south of there. With the black wildebeest, the other species, they are typically most common in the country of South Africa, and there are not nearly as many of them. There's only about 18,000 of them, although they are listed as least concern because their population is on the increase. Their population increasing is good news, because in the early 1900s, they were severely hunted in southern Africa, and they were at one point considered pretty rare, and they've bounced back quite a bit. With the black wildebeest that live in southern Africa, they are not migratory. They kind of have home ranges and home territories with smaller herd sizes too. So it's usually like 15 to 20 females with their babies and 1 or 2 males in that area, with males defending territories against other males. Now with the blue wildebeest, the common ones, as they migrate and as it gets to be their breeding season, the males suddenly like split off of the group and declare territories. And in those territories, they kind of fight with each other as to who has rights to breed with the females that are passing through. So they become very territorial for a very short window of time of a couple of weeks. And then it's like, oh, no big deal. Let's all just walk together. So it's kind of an interesting social dynamic with the wildebeest. With wildebeest, they're both species and the subspecies that exist within those are all listed as least concern, so they are not endangered, so that's very good. But they do face some threats. Their population can fluctuate a lot year to year, and by a lot I mean like 200,000 animals can die in a year. That can happen if there's big natural things that happen, like droughts or fires, and also if the predators have really good success in hunting them. Also, there can sometimes be like a really cold weather snap right when the babies are born, and that can impact things as well. So they, some of their threats are weather related, which can also be tied into climate change. And they've noticed in some years when the drought is really bad, when there's not a lot of water or rain in parts of Africa, that population starts to dip really low. In 1993, they were having a huge drought in that area, and that's the lowest that population dipped in recent years, with very few of the babies surviving that year. And when you're having 300,000 to 500,000 babies born in one population, if very few of them survive, that's going to take a real big toll. Their other big threat, and this has actually caused them to become extinct or very rare in some of those other countries, is habitat fragmentation. These animals need to be able to migrate. So when there's things put up like walls or fences, it directly impacts their ability to move, to follow the rains, to get to the good grass. And that has caused a lot of problems in some of those other countries where they are less common. Also, competition from livestock. Cows, goats, and sheep eat the same kind of grass that the wildebeest will eat, and they will often pick it clean, leaving very little food for the wild animals. So that is also one of the big threats that they face. There is an organization that's doing some really great work called the African Wildlife Foundation. They are helping to mitigate with governments of countries and also individual landowners to make sure that fences and things are not blocking important migration routes for the wildebeest who need to migrate, and also to help make sure that farmers and ranchers aren't overgrazing their livestock in different places and outcompeting. Sorry, I have a bug on me. Outcompeting the wildebeest for their food source. I wanted to talk a little bit about my experience with wildebeest. I was lucky enough to visit Kenya in 2010, and during my time there, I stayed in 3 different places in Kenya. The first 2 were far enough north that wildebeest didn't live in those areas. So only in the 3rd one, the final space that I stayed, did I see wildebeest, and that's right on the edge of the Masai Mara. The Masai Mara is the Kenyan portion of the Serengeti landscape. Serengeti is the Tanzania side. But the Kenya and Tanzania have both been pretty good to work with each other in making sure that the border between their 2 countries doesn't have a big wall or a big fence in it. We could probably all learn a little bit about that and how it's important for the other species that live on our planet to not wall off or put in a border of our countries that could inhibit their migrations. Because of that species of animals, the wildebeest, have definitely done very well in that ecosystem of Kenya and Tanzania. During my time there, it was in February, so we saw some baby wildebeest for sure. They were super cute. I loved the noises that they made. They kind of made, it's kind of like a moo that a cow makes, but it's a little more nasally. It's kind of cute. I'll see if I can find a sound of it. I can't mimic it, so I'm not gonna try. But it was really great to see them. Wildebeest are active almost all day. They'll take a nap and kind of sit down or lay down during the heat of the day. Often if it's really hot, they'll find shade under some little trees. But they're kind of out in the open, out in the grass most of the day. And if they're not eating, then they're searching for water or where to eat their next meal. They typically will only stay, like I said, about a week in any one area before they move on. I did not see the huge herd. We were in the Masai Mara a little early for that. The area I was in typically doesn't see them until March, and I was there in early February. So I was about 3 or 4 weeks too early for the huge herd to get there, but some of the early ones had gotten there. So I was able to see some wildebeest for sure. I've also seen them in a number of different zoos in the US, and it's my understanding that they don't always do well in a zoo setting because they really like green grass. That's not always easy for a zoo to provide, especially in a smaller exhibit. So the places who have them are either in the eastern United States where green grass is easier to grow, or they're very large places like the San Diego Safari Park that has huge exhibits where they can grow a lot of different grass in different areas and kind of fence off part of it and then let the animals come in when the grass is rebounded and then close the first area off to those same animals. I've also seen them at Disney's Animal Kingdom, and that is where the photo I posted earlier today on Instagram and Facebook came from. It's when I saw the wildebeest there at Animal Kingdom. They do very well in Florida because it's nice and moist and lots of green grass for them to eat. I've never personally worked with them in a zoo setting. The zoos I've worked at did not have them because, again, they are a little difficult to manage in some places. They also kind of like to wander a lot and may not always be very happy about things like fences around that may cause them some troubles. I hope you've enjoyed what I've shared with you today about wildebeest. I'll be putting up some videos and more information on the Facebook profile later today. As always, this full episode is uploaded to Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram daily. So if you missed part of it, you'll be able to watch it again shortly as I upload this portion. And it always lives on my website at jeremythezooner.com. Feel free to like, share, follow, and subscribe to all of my content across all platforms. Until tomorrow, have fun, be happy, be safe. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.